Well, again, and I do expect people to join us as we go along. Again, I'm Dana Ellis, the president of the League of Women Voters of Greater Birmingham, and I am really, really excited about our topic tonight because not only is Cindy Lowry a great moderator of all presentations, we have two of the best speakers with us tonight, two people I know pretty well. 4 people who are members of the League of Women Voters. Last week, we sent an email out with a couple of survey links in it, and we haven't had a lot of participation yet. So if you are a member, please go. One of the surveys is about location of our annual meeting, whether we're going to do it virtually, in person, or hybrid, and we want to know what our members want to do. That meeting will be mid-May. And then the other link was to a member interest survey. So we may send that email out again because we've only had about 10 people respond so far. But what I'm going to do is drop the links to those surveys in the chat. But again, that's members only. The other thing I wanted to let everyone know, whether you're a member of the League or not, tomorrow, there's a group in Alabama called the Alabama Voting Rights Coalition, and it's made up of multiple groups throughout the state, the League being one of those. And tomorrow, they're having a Facebook Live event called Restore Your Vote. So I'm going to drop the Facebook link in. What will happen is you will go to this link for the meeting. It'll be a Facebook Live. And then during the meeting, there'll be breakout sessions that will be done on Zoom. So I'm going to, hopefully you already know about this if you're a League member because you've seen the advertisement, but I'm also going to drop that in as well. So I just wanted to let you know why things are going to be showing up in your chat box. Now I will turn it over to Cindy, our vice president, who pulled together this awesome program.
All right. Hi, everyone. And thank you so much, Dana. And this was definitely pulled together, not by just me, because Dana's our involved in gun violence work and helped me to connect with our great speakers for tonight. So we're really excited about this topic. I encountered something as a moderator that I have not encountered yet on Zoom, and we're learning all these things as we go. And one is, as we're getting into campaign season, election season, I just wanted to point out that the League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization. We do get involved in advocating around issues, but not for specific candidates. So we obviously don't dictate what people have on their Zoom screens, but if you do happen to see any candidate information, please know that those are representative of the private individual that is on the call, and not any indication of the League's position on any candidates, because we do not take those. So I just felt like I needed to make that disclaimer. But we welcome everyone here. And when we decided to do this program, gun violence is definitely an issue for us in the greater Birmingham area, as it is in many cities around the state. And it's something that we all are concerned about and is ongoing, but we had no idea sort of how so much more would be happening around it in the recent days as we led up to this call today. So we have, as Dana mentioned, the legislation, which we'll talk about later in the evening, and then both the mayor and the acting sheriff of Birmingham spoke yesterday in the media about the problems that we're having in Birmingham. So I think it's really timely, as always, and appropriate that we learn more about this issue from advocates and experts who are working in these communities. And when I spoke with, so our speakers tonight are Onoyemi Williams with Faith in Action, Alabama, and Dr. Mark Wilson with the Jefferson County Department of Health. When I spoke with Onoyemi about this topic, she really kind of laid out a great framework for why, how to talk about it, and why it's a much more nuanced issue than many of us may realize if we're not living it directly. And so talking about the problem and the solutions is what we're going to do tonight. And so I think it's going to help us all to really get a better, fuller picture of what the issue is and how we can work together with Onoyemi and others to solve these problems and work towards justice in our communities and peace. So I'm going to let our speakers introduce themselves. I've had a lot of experience with being a speaker myself, and I always cringe when people read bios. It just feels like a little braggart or something to me. So I like to have people introduce themselves so they can tell us the things that they would like to highlight about their work. And so I'll turn it over to, we'll start with Onoyemi and just let you tell us about who you are and the organization you're with and how your work connects with this important issue.
So good evening, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to share this space and time with each and every one of you. I am Onoyemi Williams, the Deputy Director for Faith in Action, Alabama. And we have a campaign that is affectionately known as the Peacemaker Campaign, where we advocate on behalf of Black and Brown communities for programming that is put in place to help deal with issues of violence that allows for a converging of community and what we call institution to work together to pick up the pieces of the community and advocate for responsible investment into community for programming that is beneficial based on what we understand about how life is lived in those particular segments of society. And that's how I intersect here. And we do a lot of work with the health department, and so we have a collaborative project that we work together.
Great. And now I'll turn it over to Mark, if you'd like to introduce yourself and tell us about the health department and how you intersect with this issue. And we'll get a little more in depth later on, so we can just touch on it.
Oh, she knows I'm long-winded, so did you hear that? Yeah, hi, I'm Mark Wilson. I'm the county health officer for Jefferson County, the head of the Jefferson County Department of Health. I'm a physician by training. I've actually got a degree in engineering before that. I was actually in indigent health care at Cooper Green for 20 years before I came to the health department. Sort of just evolved into public health. So I've been here now at the health department for just over 10 years. We do a very wide array of things at the health department. We're a particularly strong health department, thanks and to great degree due to the funding stream. In Alabama, we're somewhat unique in that state law dictates that about 20% of 1 cent of your tax revenue comes directly to our health department. So we've been able to do more than other health departments in Alabama. And so I just say that to say that we're really blessed here. I'm blessed to be part of this health department and to just be in a position to do some innovation around things like violence.
Great, thank you. All right, so let's talk about the topic of the day, gun violence. Onoyemi, I'm going to turn it over to you. I know you have some slides to share with us and to help us really understand this issue and dive a little deeper into what it's all about in our community specifically.
So, thank you very much. So can everybody see the slides? I think okay, it says that you all can see. So community gun violence, parts of a plan, local solutions to community violence. And so, oops, hold on. Let's see if we can get the screen to advance. Hold on. There it is. Peacemakers of Birmingham. Who are they? It says for the past 4 years, but it's actually been 5 years. That it's been a group of community volunteers along with individuals from what we call institutions like the health department, UAB hospital, community-based groups. We've come together to work on a plan for the city of Birmingham. The Peacemakers itself is made up of clergy and lay people from throughout the community. We ask people to stand on the tenements of their faith to advocate for programming in communities in which people are suffering. The Peacemaker Plan of Action is based off of Operation Ceasefire, Cure Violence, and Advance Peace. And we were asking for, and we advocated for funding from our local government to develop a comprehensive gun violence plan here in the city of Birmingham. So that's what we advocate for. So what this slide here shows is the violence by the numbers that are gun related for the past 7 years. The numbers in red are the number of homicides that took place in our city as a direct result of a gun violence incident. If you see, last year was one of the most deadliest years here in the city of Birmingham. We had a total of 143 homicides, and 122 of those homicides were directly related to a firearm. Our partners over at UAB Hospital, we know over the years that in an average year, UAB Hospital usually treats between 600 to 700 people for gunshot injuries in addition to this number. And that's just from one hospital. That's not including your St. Vincent's or Princeton or other hospitals. That's just going into UAB, which is a level 1 trauma hospital in the area. So parts of a gun plan. There's 3 parts: prevention, interruption programs, and reentry programs. Up until now, our city has had quite a bit of funding go into prevention programs and reentry programs, but an area we noticed was our interruption programs were lacking here in the city. And the reason why interruption programs are so important is they deal with those who are actively engaged in gun violence. So a prevention program is a long-term violence reduction program. Usually is for youth between the age of 0 to 21. So that's going to be everything from your pre-K programs to, mommy and me programs. Those are considered prevention programs. The investment results, you usually see a return on investment on those programs for between 5 to 10 years. And so Youth Inc. sports teams and Growing Kings are local organizations that connect to a gun violence program that are on the prevention side. Next, you have an intervention program. It's direct communication and involvement with individuals active in gun violence. And reduction strategies are used with this particular group. The average age here in Birmingham is 17 to 34. That's based on the data of who's being injured and killed here in our city. Return on investments for those types of programs are 1 to 3 years. And examples of programs that connect to an intervention program are programs like a street outreach by Cure Violence, Advance Peace. Night walks are where we ask people from the faith community to do walks through the communities on a repetitive basis. We've suspended night walks once the pandemic hit, but they'll go back active coming in the spring, where groups will be out in the community at night. They walk the same routes on the same nights at the same time for at least 6 months to a year to build rapport with individuals in that community to understand the story of what's happening and to get a feel. And the sites that are selected are based off of data on where we know incidents are taking place and the most victims are coming from. And so that's in what violence is taking place. And then we work with neighborhood associations to understand where people are hanging out at night, where violent incidents are taking place. Our victim response team is where we ask community to support families following the incidents of violence. And the UAB hospital-based violence interruption program, which we'll talk about a little bit later with Dr. Wilson. Reentry programs are the transition of individuals from prison or jails back into the community. Those ages start at 15 because we talk with the youth department, division of youth services, those who might be in juvenile issues. Investment return is 3 to 5 years, and programs that you'll see in our community that are part of that are the Dannon Project, Offender Alumni Association, the Foundry, and the Tuscaloosa program, which is an initiative of the mayor's office. Those are reentry programs. So how a gun violence plan actually works. If a person is if we're able to invest dollars into an individual and we can stop them from committing an act of violence at the prevention stage, then the money has been well spent. The person moves on to a life without violence, void of violence, and they have a happy and productive life. But oftentimes we have people that, for lack of better words, move past the prevention stage just because social economic issues that we understand around communities places them in a situation where they become either victims of violence or perpetrators of violence. And so what they do is they enter the active cycle of what we call gun violence. And that's where, again, dollars are placed in an interruption program to break that cycle. They're either a recent victim or they are a recent perpetrator that has not necessarily been apprehended by law enforcement. Because according to law enforcement data, right now they have a 33% to 34% resolve rate on most of your homicides and acts of violence that take place. So the odds are in your favor to get away with it, unfortunately. And so you have about a 70% chance of getting away with it and not being captured. And so an interruption program comes in to work with those individuals, redirect them, and provide them services without the punitive nature that comes about receiving associated help from reentry programs. If we're unable to stop a person and redirect them in another direction, you will see them show up in the justice system. And once they've gone through the justice system, completed their incarceration, we're able to provide services on a reentry basis, which is allowing a person to return to society after they have paid their debt to society for whatever infraction they have been arrested for. And we try to provide them services so that on their reentry into society, they do not re-enter the cycle of gun violence. So a community-centered plan to deal with gun violence looks like this in short. There's the UAB hospital-based violence interruption program. And so what happens is a person will enter that program, they go into the hospital as with the injury, there is a set of individuals who are part of the street outreach team that will make interaction with them and move them into an interruption program. Or there is a community referral side that once the program is fully functioning and expanded, if somebody in the community is aware of this particular person's gun activity, they can be referred for an assessment. They can also enter an interruption program and be directed into community-based services. On the judicial side, once a person has gone through the judicial system, they can go into a reentry program and also be referred and gain access to community-based services that help deal with those who may be involved in the cycle of gun violence in the community. Community-based services include everything from mental health services, housing, food, educational services, transportation, substance abuse treatment, employment assistance, and money management, and the list goes on to daycare, slots, to just sometimes things that a lot of us take for granted that we receive in support or we receive training about. Others have never been exposed to that information. And I can tell you, it was startling to me one time when I realized one of my daughter's friends had never been out of the neighborhood and had never eaten Chick-fil-A outside of seeing a commercial on TV. And that was kind of like, huh? For many of us who have transportation, we have resources, that's very far-fetched. But what we have found, the reality is, in some communities, people do not receive the same services or have access to things that some of us take for granted. So in this, everybody has a part when it comes to gun violence and a community. And when we talk about community, it's not based on zip code, it's based on everybody who has interaction inside of the jurisdiction that we know as Jefferson County. Whether you're living in Mountain Brook or if you're living down in the bottoms, you're considered community. And so what we like to share with everybody is that everybody, the city alone cannot move us out of a gun violence issue. The health department, the hospital, or just the neighbor, we all have to work together, and we have individual parts to carry. And so that's why you see this pie chart to say that us together, moving together, we're able to bring about change into communities and that help to deal with the issue of gun violence in communities. And so with that being said, community is not an idea, it is people. It's you and I in community. We are called to love people just as they are, with their wounds and their gifts, not as we want them to be. And what is your part is the best way I can ask you. And I'll stop there so we can move to the next part of the program.
All right.
Sorry about that. I was on mute. Thanks so much, Onoyemi. That was wonderful. And I wanted to remind everybody, if you have questions, if you're able to put them in the chat, please do that, and we'll get to the questions in a moment. But if you, and then if you're not able, just write it down, and we'll open up the floor in just a moment. But I'd like to turn it over now to Mark and just let you tell us a little more specifics about the hospital intervention program that was mentioned, and how your agency is working, collaboratively with Faith in Action and others on this issue.
Yeah, thank you. As Onoyemi mentioned, one of those potential interventions is a hospital-based or hospital-linked violence intervention program. She mentioned the UAB HVIP. That is, at this point, really more of an idea than a reality, but I'm going to tell you the story about how that's going to become a reality. At our health department here in Jefferson County, other than participating with the state health department and keeping up with vital records, the causes of death and death certificates, things like that, we haven't really ever been involved in any programs to help reduce violence or reduce homicides as one of our public health programs or strategies. But when we looked at the data, Jefferson County homicide in recent years has been the 8th leading cause of premature death or preventable death overall. And among African-American young adults and teenagers, it is the #1 cause of death. So just looking at those numbers by themselves, it's sort of like it doesn't take a rocket scientist or somebody with a master's in public health or an MD after their name to say that this is a public health problem, and it's a big public health problem. So when we, our health department does usually every 5 years or so does a new strategic plan. We have a whole process for doing that. And so in our 2017-2021 5-year strategic plan, we decided to add in as a strategy, one of our objectives, to establish a strategy for our health department to help address the problem of violence in Jefferson County. So we started out with rather meager efforts of just a little multidisciplinary team within our health department. Had some preliminary conversations with some people at the UAB School of Public Health and some community organizations. Somewhere along the way, I got to know Onoyemi and Faith in Action and learned a lot about what they were doing, and actually went on one of those night walks with her where she helped orient me to some of the things they're doing in the community and some of the realities of what's going on over in the West End, talking to some of the people in the community. Also got to know Dana Ellis, who was working with Moms Demand Action, and eventually had some conversations also with Dr. Jeffrey Kirby, the head of the UAB Trauma Surgery Service, And so the conversation sort of started moving along. Also in October 2019, another thing our health department does every 5 years, and a lot of health departments across the country do this using a standardized approach. We do a community health assessment that's fairly comprehensive. We use data, we use surveys, we use expert opinion, and gather all that information together. And then with input from various stakeholders, and what we call the public health system, different stakeholders in the public health system, which is all sorts of people, not just people in health or healthcare. We come up with a countywide community health improvement plan, otherwise known as the CHIP. And when we look at the data from the community health assessment and get everybody together, and we sort of rank what we think are the top priorities. Usually we try to pick 3 to 5 priorities for us as a community to try to work together on, not just the health department, but all of the different stakeholders to try to work on moving the needle on some issues. And so for the community health improvement plan for 2020 to 2024, the number one strategic issue that was identified was violence, and specifically reducing violence and improving community safety, I think was the terminology we used. So under that framework, we started, we formed a group of different advocates, local hospital systems, local governments, the Birmingham's Office of Peace and Policy, Mom Demands Action, Faith in Action, Brother Let's Talk, again, UAB's Trauma Service and others, along with our health department, to start talking about what would be some of the best approaches for us to work together on. Out of that eventually came what's called a community roundtable, and they continued to try to look at different evidence-based strategies for reducing gun violence, and what might best work in Birmingham, Jefferson County. And during that time, we were somewhere along there. Onoyemi probably remembers the history better than I do, but we were connected with Every Town for Gun Safety, an advocacy group, and they recommended that we look at the hospital-based violence intervention program model, or HVIP. And just through further discussions, I think that there was some agreement that this type of program had, among the different major programs out there, major models that have been used in other cities, that this one might have a good chance of actually being acceptable to the people in the community who are most affected by violence and have some chance of succeeding. And part of that issue, just I'll say, as far as being acceptable, was having a program that did not have law enforcement as a part of the program, because there's a lot of distrust in the community of anything that's linked to law enforcement. And the hospital-based violence intervention program really does not have a law enforcement component. And at the same time, Dr. Jeffrey Kirby, whom I mentioned at UAB, and his staff were really very interested in hosting a hospital-based violence intervention program at their hospital. These guys, if you're ever in a serious accident or you get shot, boy, I'll tell you, there's no better place to be than UAB Trauma Service. They do amazing work. But as Onoyemi mentioned, they're seeing like over 600 gunshot wounds a year from Jefferson County alone. I think they see a few hundred more for the overall region that get shipped into them. So you can just imagine, this is just and they see a revolving door as well. Some people that are coming in more than once after they've saved them, and then they come back again. So there's just really a lot of interest around this. It was then recommended also that we engage an organization called the Health Alliance for Violence Intervention, or the HAVI. It's a nationally recognized organization that provides training and technical assistance for setting up hospital-based violence intervention programs. And they work with a number of programs in other cities around the country. I don't have the exact number, but I think it's well over 30 programs that have been established or in the process of being established. So our health department contracted with them to further some of these discussions with our community stakeholders and educate them about that program in particular. And we also asked them to help us really make sure that this was the right program for Jefferson County, that it was feasible, and that it would be something that our community would welcome and accept, and something that could be trusted by the community. So they did a lot of education, including some webinars, and we invited multiple stakeholders, community stakeholders, elected officials to a couple of those webinars to just introduce people to the idea and the rationale for it. And then they also did some more focused interviews of key stakeholders in the community, including organizations like Black Lives Matter, Brother Let's Talk, the Urban League of Birmingham, the Dannon Project, UAB, and other stakeholders to get some intel as to what some of the potential strengths, weaknesses, potential pitfalls, things we need to be aware of as we start going into this. So that's kind of how we got to this point. And I will tell you what it is at this point, now that I've given you all that background. So a hospital-based violence intervention program is a program where you take advantage of an opportunity where somebody has been hospitalized after an assault. In this case, it's mostly focused on gun violence. So somebody survived a gunshot wound, you have them in the hospital. That's a real opportunity where you have somebody who might be willing to have a conversation about turning their lives around rather than going back into that cycle of violence. So the way the program works is you have these violence intervention specialists. They sometimes have different terms. I hesitated a little because I always stumble over that one. But violence intervention specialists, these are paraprofessionals, people who are from the community. They have some street creds. They might have some lived experience with violence, either in their family or maybe themselves directly. And they are hired and they get extensive training on how to be violence interrupters. So somebody comes in the hospital, the hospital says to the patient, this is after they've been stabilized, obviously, but they're not ready for discharge. Would you be interested in this kind of program? There's sort of an informed consent type process, make sure people understand what it is. And then the hospital will call and bring in a violence intervention specialist who will come and talk to that patient and tell them we have a program where we can help you with all sorts of services to help you get your life back together. Part of it is just making sure you get the medical care you need, making sure you make your follow-up appointments, your physical wounds heal. Some of it would be help connecting you maybe to mental health services or just some counseling because you've just gone through a harrowing experience. It might be working with your family around the same thing. linking you, a lot of people are going to be substance use involved, so linking you to substance use treatment services, identifying immediate needs, immediate safety concerns. For some people to go back to where they were shot puts them in danger. So it might involve emergency housing, helping to make sure that they're safe in the near term. And then just assessing a whole bunch of other things that we would, call determinants of health or determinants of violence or preventing violence. So making sure they complete their education, get connected to job opportunities, just all sorts of things like that, support services. So in addition to these violence intervention specialists, there would be a supervisor over them to help them, do their jobs well, monitor the intervention specialists, make sure they get their needs met. There's often, stress and trauma, vicarious trauma that occurs from these workers that are dealing with a lot of folks that have been through some really bad experiences. So mental health services and support are provided for those workers. There's a full-time social worker, case manager involved for case management services. And then there's just some administrative oversight. And then there's a pot of money for some of these resources like emergency housing or transportation or other needs that people might have to help get their lives back together. And typically one of these hospital-based violence intervention workers will have a caseload of up to about 15 or 20 clients at a time or per year. Usually they engage the clients for up to about 6 months. So that sort of gives you a picture of this. So our, because this was part of our health department's strategic plan, part of this community health improvement plan that we helped lead, and we had this evidence-based program that the community says they want. I went to our Board of Health and asked that it be put in our budget, and we budgeted just over $1.1 million for 2022 to fund the beginning of this program. I'm sorry, I failed to mention the evidence base and some of the statistics. I think Onoyemi might have touched on this, but the big picture idea around this is that these folks that have been shot, they have over the next 5 years have a 44% chance of being re-victimized, being a victim a second time during the next 5 years, 44% chance. They have a 20% chance of dying of homicide in the next 5 years. So one of the primary objectives is just to keep these people alive and help them onto a better path, a better trajectory in life. Another major objective of this program is to cut down on retaliatory shootings or acts of violence. So a big part of that initial intervention is to try to dissuade people from taking revenge. So I'm sorry, I failed to mention that before. There have been some studies done, Chicago, Baltimore, San Francisco, that have been sort of controlled studies where they show an intervention group versus a control group that do show some major reductions in that repeat injury or repeat hospitalization for violence. So there is an evidence base out there. I should have mentioned that earlier. So the initial budget that we have would be for 2 or 3 of those intervention specialists, a supervisor, a full-time social work case manager, administrative overhead, again, a pot of money to help assist people with transportation needs and other emergency housing needs, et cetera. the training that is involved. These folks are going to go through at least 4 months of training initially before the program starts. Membership in this HAVI organization and continued technical assistance and support from that national organization. The program itself, another decision we made was it will not be run by UAB. It will not be run by our health department. We're going to identify a community-based organization that we feel has some creds with the community, some trust in the community, and has some experience with running programs, some experience managing grants, the capacity to do this. So we'll be working with a third party that would hire the staff, oversee the staff, and go through all the training and all that. So the way we decided to do this is our health department has a partnership with the Community Foundation of Greater Birmingham, and with their cooperation, we are going to set up a grant process through the Community Foundation. Our health department has a fund in the Community Foundation called the Public Health Advised Fund. We use that to fund all sorts of things in the community to help build public health capacity in the community. So working with us, we developed a request for proposals that went out a couple of weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks now. The deadline for proposals from these community organizations will be March 11th. We will then review those proposals and choose an organization, and they will get started hopefully in April with the hiring and training process. And hopefully we can actually see some people coming in the hospital to intervene by the end of the summer or so, or early fall. Another thing that we did was, and Onoyemi mentioned advocacy, trying to get the city government involved. I did go to the city council in December and asked them to use some of their COVID relief money or their emergency, the American Rescue Plan money. I shouldn't have said COVID relief. And we got them to commit to an additional $1 million during year 2 and year 3 of this program. So that would enable us to essentially more than double the size of the program. And then beyond year 3, we hope that this organization will be able to start getting some federal funding, because we think that there will be more and more federal funding coming down, because this problem of gun violence is just a huge problem throughout the country. So the federal government's definitely interested in doing something. Our health department, we've looked at our budget projections. We are committed to continuing to provide about $1 million per year indefinitely, is what we call backbone funding, so that the organization can continue to function, at least with that initial staffing model that I mentioned to you. And we've had some nice experience with this model of helping start a program and provide backbone funding. A couple examples are the Recovery Resource Center to address people's needs to get help navigating into drug treatment. The Recovery Resource Center of Jefferson County, we've committed to long-term funding for 4 staff members. They have now managed to grow to 17 staff members with other grant funding. Nurse Family Partnership, we helped start. We funded the first 6 nurses. It's the UAB School of Nursing. It's a nurse visitation program for first-time low-income mothers through age 2 of their child, help improve birth outcomes and overall outcomes for young children. We're committed to providing that funding indefinitely, and they are also growing, and they are also becoming a model that the state Medicaid program wants to replicate. That Recovery Resource Center program, and that's something the Department of Mental Health wants to replicate in Alabama, and it's already been replicated in Walker County. So that kind of model of starting something, providing the backbone funding, and then allowing them as an independent organization with, frankly, much more versatility than a governmental organization like the health department. It's really fun to see something get started, get planted, and then grow. So that's our hope with this hospital-based violence intervention program. And we're calling it hospital-linked violence intervention program because it's not run by the hospital. It's linked to this third organization we were talking about. So I'll stop there and see if there are any questions.
Great. That's really, really interesting. I'm interested to hear all the different tentacles that the health department has in the community and how you're working in those ways to support community organizations. I wasn't aware of a lot of that. So thank you for that.
Let me just real quick, Cindy, I'm sorry. I want to repeat, I owe a great debt to Onoyemi Williams and Dana Ellis. A lot of times, some of these program ideas are not things that I dreamed up or somebody at our health department dreamed up. It's something somebody else brought to us. And so they deserve a lot of credit.
All right, thank you. Well, we do have some good questions and I'll refer this to both of you. I think a lot of them may be a little more in Onoyemi's territory, but they all kind of go to the similar subject matter. So I'm going to word them and kind of combine them. A lot of them have been sent to me privately, so y'all can't see them, but I'm going to kind of combine some of them because as I mentioned earlier, when I talked to Onoyemi in our first initial conversation, one of the things that stuck out to me was that she talked about, and I hope you're still here with this. Yeah, there you are, Onoyemi. She talked about the nuance in the way, if we're not deeply plugged into this issue, we're listening to the news and particularly national news, our brains usually, mine anyway, I can't really speak for everyone's, but it goes straight to regulate the guns, get the guns off the street. How do we do that? And I'm not saying that's a huge part of the whole picture is common sense gun regulations, and we're seeing that play out in Alabama in another direction right now, which we'll get into later. But some of the questions are about like sort of I didn't see gun regulation advocacy or getting the gun surrendering and those kinds of things in your program. And that really sticks out to me. You're talking about working in the community. You're talking about understanding the community needs, the community cultures that these kids are growing up in and using that knowledge and that experience to find programs that work for intervening in this. So that really stuck out to me. And I'd just like to elaborate a little more. One of the questions specifically, which I think relates to that whole topic, is what role do gangs play in these communities and in this issue, or is there such a thing as gangs anymore? And so I think these are just kind of all things that we have in our minds as almost like stereotypes or buzzwords or whatever. So I'll let you talk a little bit to that.
And so I'll say this. Is there a such thing as gangs? Yes. I'll be remiss if I said that there's no such thing as gangs. But the biggest conversation is communities that are fully depleted of resources. You're coming into communities where we struggle to have mental health resources. We're struggling to keep the lights on. We're struggling to keep food in the house. We're struggling to get from work. We're struggling to find employment that allows us to make a living wage. We're struggling. And so you add to that struggle a society that says that you're nothing, you're worthless, you're bad, you're this, you're that. Nothing possibly good can probably come out of West End. Nothing good can possibly come out of the bottoms. And so you're stripped of all self-value. You're stripped, and the only thing you really got left is your little bit of street credibility that you're protecting with dear life for many of our young people in these communities. And so when they get into these arguments, when they get into these social media beefs, they're protecting the most valuable thing they have left, their reputation. Because for many of them, they have stopped dreaming. Our communities do not foster dreams. We're forced to deal with the reality of what we're living every day. A lot of our young people in these communities had a young man, he's been shot several times. His biggest dream was to be a plumber, and that was too far-fetched for him. That was out of reach for him. You wanted to be a plumber? Yeah, I know I'll never, that's just how far-fetched it is in some of these communities. And so when you don't go in and have a conversation where you're talking about your grandmother never graduated from high school, your mother never graduated from high school, your grandmother never graduated from high school, it's hard for you to think of somebody having a college degree, especially in your community. In these communities, society has created a system where the best and the brightest don't stay in our communities. All you have is those who have without. Unless you're intentional about living in these spaces, oftentimes these children, these young people never encounter anybody outside of a teacher or a doctor that has a college degree, because none of your neighbors do. All of you all are stuck kind of as the remnant of society, because banks don't loan money to buy houses in West End too high. It's very hard to get a loan to purchase a property. Oftentimes our properties are priced below $40,000, which most banks will not pull a loan for that. It's hard to, and so those who have graduated, became successful, they move to other parts of the city where they can take advantage of credit resources. So again, those who are left behind oftentimes are either elderly in their retirement years, or they're in the same situation. And so it's hard to dream. It's hard to dream when you're poor. You can't afford to. And so that leads to a lot of the violence. It leads to a lot of the hyperization of conversations that are negative among people, and why they're quick, because they're already living in stressful situations. So it doesn't take much to set them over the edge. I remember reading an article that talks about stress in impoverished neighborhoods. On average, the average person, when they wake up in the morning, their stress level is only 0 is being that of a baby, no stress. But in most neighborhoods in suburbia, the average person's stress level when they wake up in the morning is about 2. When you go into communities of poverty, their average stress level when they wake up in the morning before they put their feet on the ground is about a 7. 10 means an explosion.
So your organization, so someone asked about in this vein about root causes, and you're making it very clear the root cause is the poverty and the lack of resources and the lack of hope and dreaming. And so your organization, I'm certain, does more than these programs. This is part of your organization's programming, but you also work on some of these other issues as well.
We are advocates. We advocate for dollars being put in place for programs to be brought into fruition, and the people in the community not only help to develop the solution, but are given the actual dollars to put into play to be part of the solution coming into fruition. What we often see in these communities, that a solution is identified, but the community is not given the money to help deal with their issue. Someone else is given the money to launch programs into their communities. But when you say to the community, we believe in you and we're going to make an investment in you, and we want you to be part of the resolution of the issue that has been identified in your community, you'll be surprised how active people will become in wanting to engage in that process.
So I have a follow-up to that, but I'm going to go to this other question that's in the chat because I don't want to be the main talker, question asker. But there's also, and this may be one for Mark, there's a question about, so you mentioned the 600 hospitalized for gun violence that the hospitals see on an annual basis. And there's a question about how does that break down? And I don't know the terminology, so excuse me if I say something, but those who have been shot versus, so sometimes the actual initiator of the shot, of who's shooting, the person in the chat said perpetrator. I don't know if that's the right term or not, but they get shot as well. So do we break out those groups? Does the intervention program also address those people, or is victim the term for all of them, because they really are all a victim of the deeper causes? And so how does the intervention address that?
Yeah, so that's a good question, and for which I do not have the answer. It's well, I don't have any statistics on that, but I think I understand the question. It's how many people got shot because they started it. They were shooting at somebody, I guess. I don't know. I think it doesn't matter because this whole program is not going to be in the business of deciding who's a perpetrator or who started the fight or who started the argument and who didn't. As was mentioned earlier, the clearance rate on these, certainly on the homicides, is low. There's just going to be a lot of cases where we don't even know who the perpetrator was. Somebody just got shot. We certainly aren't going to be able to prove who it was. So I think the more important thing is this is a person who's gotten in trouble. They have been shot. They're at risk of being shot again or shooting. And we want to try to interrupt that cycle and try to get them onto a new path. And whether they whether law enforcement comes after them or not that's not our business.
And I will just piggyback to say this: a third of all of our homicides are retaliatory in nature. And then we also know most times people know exactly who shot them. Unfortunately, just due to what the culture is of our community with our relationships with law enforcement, I can know, but I'm not going to share that information with those agencies. And so because it's a community-based program, there is a greater chance of being able to identify the shooter and asking them, hey, can we put a truce to this? What is it going to take to move you past this point where you're not shooting anymore? And so that becomes an option for that individual as well, for us to be able to refer that person into services if they need it without there being a punitive nature, and nobody gets labeled a snitch, because now there's no punitive associated with law enforcement coming from you participating in this project. Now, if the law enforcement break the case and they come after you, we ain't got nothing to do with that. But for the purpose of offering service from the community, and it's important to share with people, up until now, these individuals can only get services prior to now after they've gone through the judicial system. And the judicial process is very stripping. It strips a lot of people of their dignity because it's a very harsh system if you've never had the chance to experience that. And so we're saying our people deserve an opportunity to be made whole and to be offered services without them being stripped of all of their humanity.
Thank you. There is a question about the DHR. Are they in the conversation? Are they one of the stakeholders and partners in this? And that Department of Human Resources?
Yeah, I'll try to answer that. I'm not aware of them being a major stakeholder in the conversation. One conversation we did have, and a decision we made when we were consulting with this hobby organization, was whether to try to engage youth or minors who would much more likely to be, DHR clients. And we decided initially, at least, to focus on people who are not minors. Because when you start dealing with people who are under the age of 19, it gets a lot more complicated. And we're just trying to start with the lower hanging fruit of a program, with a program that we think we can make it succeed and not get too messy. But, ultimately, it would be great to involve younger people. So that, at least in my mind, that's where DHR would come in if we were dealing with younger people who might be in a situation that was where they're a minor or they're an otherwise vulnerable person and they need DHR help. Onoyemi, do you recall, or Dana, do you recall any discussions with them?
We've had some superficial conversations, nothing in depth. They're aware that the program is moving forward, but we were really trying to get the pilot up so we could start ironing out the wrinkles that maybe we will find once we get into the process. And so that's what we've been focused in. But there is space for us to double back once the pilot is online. So it's continuing to bloom.
Yeah, I guess the only other situation where now that I think about it, is DHR could potentially get involved if the victim were a parent of a small child and it was determined there's a small child in that family that might be in danger or in a dangerous situation. So, that would maybe be a situation where they would get involved. I would also say we've definitely have partnered with DHR a lot around substance use and parents who are addicted to drugs. And we were involved in helping start a new program here in Jefferson County called Safe Care, where there's social workers that will work with a parent to help them keep their child, but at the same time, make sure their child is safe while they get into drug treatment. So there may be some situations like that, since in as much as there's some overlap with drug use and violence.
Thank you. So a couple more good questions been privately sent. So I do want to acknowledge that there's someone on the call who has a friend whose child was killed in an accidental, it was in a wrong place at the wrong time. Someone was stressed and shooting, randomly hit and killed. And I think that this, I want to make it clear that I don't think any of us are saying that. The point was made that if there were no gun, this person would not have been killed. So I want to make it clear that we're not talking about gun control, that's not a piece of the picture. I don't know if either of you want to say anything about where that fits into the puzzle, or if we are going to talk about the Alabama legislation after all this other talk, and we'll let our speakers go. But I think the point of today's conversation was really that there's a lot of solutions that we need to consider, and there's a lot more depth to the situation that need to be dealt with to deal with the root causes. So that's not the only piece of the pie. So I just wanted to, or puzzle. So I just wanted to bring that up and acknowledge that.
And so
I'm commenting on it. It looks like you want to comment on it also, Onoyemi. You go ahead.
So I'm going to say, I know you noted that my conversation had nothing to do with the relinquishing of weapons in these communities, nor any buyback programs and things of that nature. And the reason why we don't ask for them to do that, because that's not an ask made in other communities. Black and brown communities are the only communities that you often hear the residents and the people that live in those communities to relinquish their firearms, when there's an abundance of firearms in other communities as well. We're not the only ones that buy weapons. And so the bigger conversation we like to place forth is there's a significant amount of investment needs to be placed on guns, safety, and education in these communities as they continue to change the laws and make them available to all communities. It's unfair to allow certain communities to say, we want the right to carry whenever we want to, but then go to another community and tell them, we want you all to stand bare naked with no way to defend yourself. If we're going to have a real conversation, let's say, okay, if you want to place these laws on the books, you have the responsibility of also providing safety into communities, giving people proper education on how to handle weapons, how to store weapons, how to put things in place that help communities understand the responsibilities associated with having these types of weapons. And so that's why people will never hear, I'm not a proponent of gun buyback programs, because oftentimes they're not successful. And then I'm not a big proponent of telling one group of people they have to relinquish their rights to bear arms when other communities are steadily gaining in more and more rights to bear arms. And so I will say that I leave that there.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm glad you went first, Onoyemi. I will tell you, I often remember the time we did walk through West End together, and you introduced me to a man who was cleaning his car or polishing his hubcaps on the street. And we had a conversation, And what I remember about it was, I think he mentioned an incident where they were in a service station and he's with his 2 kids, and somebody came up and started harassing them and acting in a very threatening sort of way where they felt like they were about to get robbed. And basically that he and his children, who are what, like 13, maybe 15, 16, I think there were 2 of them, they all carry guns. And the reason they do is they feel like they have to defend themselves. They are not safe in their neighborhood. And so that just really had an impression on me. And so part of this is getting to a place where people just feel more safe. And that's a tall order. I do think, I mean, this is my opinion. I mean, guns are very prevalent. I mean, everybody's got one. And I think part of the problem is more has to do with how, aside from having to protect yourself when you're clearly being threatened, but then we hear these stories where somebody gets in an argument about somebody's girlfriend or somebody's, you know, somebody's shoes or something that's very trivial, and they have guns, but they don't know how to do conflict resolution. They don't know how to settle disagreements or arguments. So I think it's my opinion that that's some work that needs to be done. And I know that's something Mayor Woodfin has been talking about, is some programs around starting with a very young age, helping children learn conflict resolution skills.
That's something that was mentioned in this conversation in the chat, as well as that piece of it, is recognizing that we can't solve our disputes with guns. So there is another great question that's private, so I'm not going to mention the person who posted it, but there is a sergeant with the Birmingham Police Department on the call, and they're hearing a lot of community partnership, but none about law enforcement. So what is the role that law enforcement is playing in this partnership and this work that y'all are talking about?
And I have to be we recognize that the community does not have a healthy relationship with law enforcement. And so we have to be very, very transparent about that. These types of programs aren't meant to go against law enforcement, but it's meant to be that intersection where we're able to reach people that law enforcement cannot reach. I've had some very candid conversations with Sheriff Petway and other people, the previous sheriff, the previous chief of police, deputy chief of police, Davenport. I've had very candid conversations about why these programs cannot be ran through law enforcement agencies, because there is a distrust in the community. And as soon as you come out there, it's all conversations are cut. And so even with Sheriff Petway and some things and ideas he wanted to do, I had to explain to him, if we're to be successful, there has to be some separation. And it's not that we don't believe in you all, it's not that we don't trust you all, but this is an area where you all are not going to have success, and that law enforcement isn't the only way. Community has a big role to play. Because I can tell you, by us having victim response teams in the community that have responded to families, we've been able to figure out who was hot in the family. We were able to put individuals in community with others that could talk to them. And I personally got a phone call from a victim's brother a couple of months after his sister had been murdered. The person who killed the sister was out on bail, and he showed up. I tell this story often, and the guy showed up at one of the local motorcycle clubs. And for all accounts, they ain't nobody to play with. They about that life. But what happened was other folks was pushing him up to go ahead and handle business, and it would be covered within the realm of the outlaw world. The case would not be cracked, okay? And so he called me because he remembered the conversations he had had not only with me, but other men in the community and counselors about if he retaliated, what it would mean for him and what it meant for his family. And so what he did was he called me and he was like, pull up. I jumped on my bike and I gave him an easy way out. He was able to jump on his motorcycle. I jumped on my motorcycle and we pulled out because he had community that came in and planted a seed of support. And unfortunately, about 4 months after that incident, the person that killed his sister killed someone else, and he was rearrested. But community plays a big role, because that could have been a retaliatory situation right there, because it was primed and opportune. And that's what this is about. Not placing all of the weight on law enforcement, but allowing the community to come in and participate and support where the law enforcement agency can.
We're not at all saying that law enforcement doesn't have a very important role. I mean, we need good law enforcement to keep people safe and get the perpetrators off the street. And I hope law enforcement can get to where they're better able to do that. I think one of the big issues I also hear about is our judicial system. You know, the fact that somebody who does commit murder is out on bail, and they're like walking in the grocery store and there's the person who killed your sister, you know, right there. And the ability of our courts to get these cases prosecuted quickly, there's a lot of bottlenecks. That I'm hearing that secondhand. I don't have firsthand knowledge of that, but that's a huge problem that makes people in our community continue to feel unsafe and re-traumatized on a daily basis.
I can tell you, speaking to DA Carr, he told me the average case, in most of these cases, it takes 2 to 3 years for them to actually go to full prosecution. So you have to remember, the social economics of those we're dealing with in many of these cases do not allow them to relocate. And so you're having to stay in the same house, in the same neighborhood with people who have perpetrated crimes against your family that can often be traumatic. We've had families go homeless. We've had mothers threaten suicide. We've seen the gist and gamut of issues that result from this stuff. And so people don't realize that to have a mother go homeless because they couldn't afford to relocate after their son was murdered on their front steps, but they couldn't afford to go in the house anymore. That's a lot. To live next door or in the same housing development with somebody who has taken the life of your loved one and you can't afford to relocate, it's a lot. And so these matters are a lot more complex, but a lot in some ways simple, but most people don't take the time to actually hear from the people in the community, and they just go with what the headline says about what's really taking place versus the conversation with the people in the community that can tell you what actually took place with them.
I noticed something in the chat about Black versus white, and I just also want to make it clear, even though I mentioned statistics on how young Black men are disproportionately affected, the UAB statistics we had, 19% of the people that come into UAB with gunshot wounds are white. So this is not just a Black issue, and these services we're talking about providing are going to be for anyone that is willing to take advantage of it. There will be limited resources. We will not be able to offer this to all 600 and something people that are shot. We'll have to start, smaller. Yeah, this is not exclusively one race or the other. I just want to make sure that's very clear.
Thank you.
And I'll just end with this on this part. Jefferson County is leading the way. We're attempting to replicate this same program to create a network in the state. So Huntsville, Mobile, and Montgomery are all in the process of doing the same thing with those regional hospitals so that we can, not only be able to move money from the federal level into our state, but from the state level into the individual jurisdictions to help support these programming. So we advocate, and we just ask people to join us in advocating on these issues, because we also do work around the VOCA's Victims Crime Compensation application, and that affects all victims of crime from rapes to DUIs and how they're able to receive benefits after the result of a violent crime. So we're advocates that bang on people's doors until, you know.
There's one more question in the chat that's, do we have block by block data on gun violence incidents? And then the same person asked, is it possible to change how the community values a reputation of nonviolence?
Block by block data. So you understand that the NRA has created bottlenecks in how gun data is reported. And that's on a federal level. On a local level, we also run into bottlenecks on data and how data points are being collected, stored, and shared throughout the community. Thanks in part to UAB, because it is a research hospital and they have research doctors. It's not public information, but we do have the ability, once we drill down some of the HIPAA stuff out of it, for us to be able, they share with us what they're able to garner from their actuaries and researchers inside the hospital. And so that's another reason why we like the relationships with the health services and our hospitals, because they have access to data and research that we normally would not be able to access because of federal regulations surrounding, because the CDC at this time does not collect data associated with gun violence.
And we do have zip code level data from UAB. I mean, the police also have good data. It's just a matter of using that data. And I know that's something they're trying to work on doing a better job of as well.
Thank you. So there was also a question about the, there's one more question and then we'll kind of wrap it up with some closing remarks, but I'm pretty sure you can't. Oh, Caleb, yes, go ahead.
Sorry, just to kind of explain the question. Me and my wife and now our two sons live in the neighborhood, and a little while ago there was a shootout near us. Live in West End. There's a shootout near us, and like our neighbor's house, their daughter's window got hit, and like our house got hit. And I work for Cahaba. You know, a significant part of the mission and culture is to live amongst the people we care for and work with. And it's also nice to be walking distance to your office. And so I wanted to, remain local, but it's also, you feel sort of almost irresponsible to stay in this community and impose, a possibly avoidable risk to your family. And so I called the police department to ask, is there, can I live in this community and maybe on a different block where this doesn't, seem to happen? Because some of my peers and colleagues who live, just a couple blocks away don't seem to have the same amount of issues. And the police officer I spoke with, was not aware of any data and not aware of how to get that data. But if I was just thinking, because earlier in the conversation, we talked about people who can leave, do leave. And sometimes, I think that might be driving, it's just feeling unsafe. And if there was a way, because I'm sure that, right, West End is not a monolith, right? There's going to be, block by block, the culture probably changes a little bit and there's safer and less safe corners. And I think, part of it, I'm not from this neighborhood, so I don't know that stuff. And maybe if I did, I would know. But I think for people who either want to stay or want to come back or want to move in and invest in this neighborhood, I think knowing more granular data would be helpful when you're choosing place to rent or place to buy. So yeah, that's kind of where that question, the block by block question, was coming from. Yeah.
You work with Cahaba Medical Care, correct?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, we appreciate your service.
Appreciate you guys.
And
Thank
so,
you for.
yeah, and so when we talk about the data just kind of tells you where something happens. Gun violence is not isolated. As we have seen shootings take place from everywhere from down at the BJCC in the parking lot earlier this year to incidents in the mall this weekend over in Tuscaloosa. The biggest thing is we have to provide a shift in the culture surrounding people's desires to eliminate or seriously injure someone over something that's not worth losing their lives over. And we have to help people see the value, again, of not just themselves, but someone else. But we first have to help them see their value, because when a person has a certain value about themselves, a real value about themselves, you're going to protect that value. But a lot of our young people in these communities have been stripped off of all of their personal value by what society has labeled them as and what they are seen as. And so we commend you for being in the community working. We ask you to hang in there with us as we continue to move this work forward. And we pray for a better resolve in tomorrow by these investments into the community.
Appreciate that.
Thank you. And you know, I actually bought a house in Eastlake years ago, like before the bubble burst, to early 2000s, and my parents were like, oh, you can't go live in Eastlake by yourself. It was a transition. You know, there were some friends I knew moving over there, but it was obviously there's different levels of housing in the area. And I was just like, oh, obstinate. Why can't I live over there? It's a nice house. I want to live there and I can afford it. And so what I did, because I didn't, maybe their data wasn't there. I wasn't great at researching data, but I just went over there like at all different times of day and night to see how it felt. I just would go walk on the sidewalk and be like, okay. And I kind of knocked on the doors of the houses near the house I was looking at to see what the neighbors were like and if they were going to be friendly. And it turned out to be a great place. I did end up moving later on in life, but it turned out to be a great place. And so, and I do think, and I experienced being broken into in Forest Park in my apartment, and I did not experience anything like that in Eastlake. So it's just anecdotal, but it's just different everywhere. And none of this is isolated. And I agree. And so that's kind of where I wanted to take us as we close tonight is you've mentioned a couple of times, Onoyemi, how people can support the work that your organization is doing and other organizations in this realm. And I think really helping us understand, one thing I always want to give a shout out to the League, because I'm fairly new member of the League in the last few years. And I've always been so impressed with how members of the League do not take issues lightly. They study issues, they want to know issues, and they want to know how they can get involved in helping and working on the issues. And so I think that's why it's important for us to hear all of this. And I appreciate everyone's honest and sometimes difficult questions on this topic tonight. And so if you can just share with us a little more, or once again, how we can support your work and how, how we can get involved in things like getting into the community and getting to know the community and sort of overcome maybe any fears that we might have and just work with you more.
So we're easy to find. We're Faith in Action Alabama on all of the social media platforms. There's many opportunities in the months of March and April. We will be hosting, along with some collaborators, Moms Demand Action, the Selma Center for Nonviolence, and all of our hubs. We will be hosting with the VOCA's compensation office that's in Montgomery, how to complete the victim's compensation application. That is a huge asset for communities. So in the event someone is injured or killed, that the community around them know how to access state resources to help people get mental health treatment, relocation dollars, all sorts of benefits on a state level. And that is in part for us being able to help bridge the gap between what the social workers are able to do at the hospital, at the police department and at the DA's office, making more people aware of how to access. So that's a training that's coming up in the coming months. And then just keep up with us, because we're going to be advocating for the VOCA Fund office here soon, because what we found is the reason why there's a bottleneck in those services, after we just did a research action with the executive director of VOCA on Sunday. And there's a bottleneck. It should take about 30 days for a family. And so we have research actions where we ask people to go in and talk to people who are operating certain services or programs and just really hear and find out what's actually going on. So we're always in need of researchers to help us advocate and move items through, because what we found in that one is that there's a bottleneck. Their processing system is antiquated, where an application should only take 30 days. Right now, they're running between 12 to 18 months on processing those applications just because they don't have infrastructure. And so that means it takes a person 12 to 18 months to be able to get access to mental health services when we're trying to get them that access immediately. And so we'll be doing some advocation around that. We're advocating to get more funding in the Office of Minority Disparities at the state level, so that we can move money into these communities. And so there'll be plenty of opportunities. We'll be putting them out there, and we just ask people, hey, if nothing else, come jump on a call and listen to what someone is saying, read an annual report with us to see if we can kind of figure out what's going on, and put your questions on the table, and show people that we're actually interested in what they're doing and where dollars are going and flowing.
Great, and there's Mark, put some websites in the chat as well. Put Faith in Action website as well as everytown.org website for folks. And I guess we can probably, Jean, maybe answer. We can send a follow-up email with some of these links potentially after the call. I've copied them and pasted them so we have them.
Yeah, the Everytown one was just some information about the VOCA for those that aren't familiar with it.
Okay. And did someone else come off mute and want to say something? Or was that an accident?
That was not me, but I will add, I've already posted it once and I'm posting. I'm sorry, I was talking. I've already posted this link once and
You went on mute again. You must be hitting something.
I must be. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I'm gonna keep my hands away from my computer. There is an Everytown research report that is not an easy report to read. It's called Invisible Wounds, Gun Violence and Community Trauma Among Black Americans. I've put it in there once before. I'm putting it again for anybody that might have missed it. This is a very important document, so I hope that some of you whose interest may have been stimulated would read this. The community trauma that is being experienced is something we should all be more aware of.
Thank you. All right, well, that concludes our program for tonight. If you would like to stay on a few more minutes to discuss the legislation, Dana has been watching the legislature today and discuss specifically the permitless carry bill, and you want to talk about others too?
Right now, I was just planning to talk about permitless carry unless somebody wants to bring something else up.
Okay, so we'll stay on a few more minutes if you're interested in that. If not, thank you so much, Onoyemi and Mark Wilson, for your great information and for all the work you're doing. And thanks to everyone who participated.
Thanks. Good to be with everyone.
Thank you.